So I want to take a minute. My gosh, I am instrument rated. It hit me coming back here. Come back and I realized that I'm working on my commercial now. Like, I am in commercial training. Like, you see, I'm not saying it's the best filming location, but okay. Can't fly today and I have to work in a couple hours, but let's, oh, you're not gonna fit in the windshield. Seriously, bro? Come on. I passed my oral examination on December 16th and I was 50% an instrument rated pilot, I guess, if you want to put it that way, which is kind of goofy. But I passed on December 16th and then we waited for good weather and I rescheduled and eventually passed the practical flight portion of the instrument check ride exam on the 29th. I am starting the year instrument rated 2 days before the new year. I made my resolution. That's all I wanted to do this year. All I wanted was to get my instrument and I did it. You know how many breakdowns I have had in this mirror crying after a really hard instrument lesson. And now I'm here telling you that you are instrument rated, baby. That feels fake. That feels fake. I gotta go. My instrument training, oh my gosh, I started my instrument training. I'm already tired, like, just think about it, bro. Like, I'm already tired. I'm already tired, bro. Okay, so I started instrument training May 31st and I finished on December 29th, 2020. But I also had an injury. I had some things happen where I genuinely feel like I could have finished instrument around August, September if I would have had the same instructor and if things would have gone to plan, but that was the year that will not be named. And we all know how that year went. I mean, in today's economy, right? Honestly, like, I'm not even trying to get pity, yo. I don't wish it on anyone. I don't wish it on anyone. That being said, you don't care anymore about this. You don't care about me. You don't care about my personal story. Let's stop talking about me and let's talk about... In oral examination for your check ride, you're basically in a room and they're asking you questions about your knowledge and testing your knowledge base for 2 to 3 hours. It is pretty nerve-wracking. My oral examination was about 3 hours. This is the pile of things that I brought to the examination. I have my all tabbed up. I have my ASA test book guide, which, speaking of which, this booklet I dragged around with me everywhere. I brought it hiking with me. When my foot was hurt, I read it like every night. I brought it with me to work and I would read it on breaks. I did study with the ASA oral test prep book, which I've mentioned. I used Shepherd to pass my written. Getting ready for my check ride, I didn't really have a steady stream of material to digest other than the FARM and the ASA oral prep book. I really didn't use that much. I used a couple of different sources, but those were my 2 main things that I used, and a lot of YouTube. Like, I will be honest, I continue showing up and putting out on YouTube because I love YouTube so much. It has helped me so much just in my life. Like, the amount of things that I have Googled and YouTubed, not everything is on there. So I would really recommend getting a study program and talking to your instructor. Do not go into instrument, do not go into your check ride and not have like a very regimented study program, maybe online on your laptop or wherever, where you can go and check off the day and think, okay, so I reviewed VORs today, tomorrow we're gonna review this. I wish I would have had that. So I'm telling you my mistake because right away I want you to know that and I want you to have that and not make the same mistake that I did. So I made a video about my failure. I already talked about that. So technically I went through 2 oral examinations for my instrument, although the first one that I failed on I didn't really get that far into, and I did fail on pre-flight and on ground speed. So that is in the video link down below. I'm not going to talk about it because I already made a whole separate video on it. I showed up a little bit early. I was already eyeing the weather and I knew we weren't going to fly. Like, I had a very strong feeling. I had looked at the weather a week, 2 weeks prior, and I kind of knew we weren't going to be able to fly because it was nearly winter in Portland at the time. Winter started, I think, about a week later officially. So we were at the very end of fall, but it is the Pacific Northwest. Is she friendly? No. Is she cute? Yes. But I was like, Abby, we're not going to worry about that right now. Let's focus on the oral examination. Let's focus on that. Let's pass that. Let's worry about the flight later. We were wearing a mask the whole entire time, and I also wore a mask in the plane the whole entire time. It's just weird. It's gonna be like a weird thing to look back on and remember, like, why was I wearing a mask? But I do want to say, watch out for hyperventilation when you're flying. If you're taking a check ride and you also have to wear a mask, if you're taking one like during these trying times. I hate even saying that. I hate even saying that because I'm so sick of those commercials. Make sure that you breathe, because I was wearing my thick Nike one. I'm gonna be honest with you. I love that one. It is thick. Like, I can't really breathe through it. So I made sure that I was breathing during my flight and during the oral examination, because it's just, you don't want to hyperventilate on your check ride when you're already nervous and maybe hyped up on coffee, which I don't recommend. You better not be hyped up on coffee because we've talked about that. After we went through paperwork and we did that for a good 45 minutes, even maybe the beginning hour, after we started to talk about the cross country that I had planned. It's going to flow very naturally. It's going to flow kind of like a conversation. He looked at my cross country and he was like, oh, okay, this is nice. This looks pretty good. Oh, why did you pick the route that you picked? Why can't we go lower right here? So that was one of the first questions he asked me. So he was asking about the MEA, and he kind of led me into that question, and I immediately jumped into the MEA, so the minimum en route altitude. I want to make sure that I'm clear of obstacles. Keep your answer short. Keep it short. Keep it sweet. If you give anything extra, they're going to dig into that and they will find a weakness. They are a DPE. They are a designated pilot examiner. They have more hours than you. There's no competition. There's no fight in this. They're going to know more than you. Most likely. I mean, most likely. And I left it at that. I left it short and sweet. And then if he would ask more, oh, well, how much obstacle clearance does it give you, right? And then they act like they're curious. They act like it's a normal conversation. And then I would say, well, it gives me 2,000 in mountainous areas and it gives me 1,000 in non-mountainous areas. And then they might ask, is this a mountainous area? Actually, yes, this is a mountainous area. We live near the Cascade Range. I am in Portland, Oregon. It's definitely a mountainous area. Mount Hood affects everything around here. So that is kind of a natural flow of how the questions might go. They are scenario based and I was prepared for that, as you should be prepared for that. You should read your ACS. Please read it. Like, I know you've probably heard this, but it's literally to the letter everything you're going to be tested on. So flight planning was my weakness. I can't even say I ever really got formally trained on how to do it in private. I did it on paper, so it was very different from now. Instrument, let me tell y'all, I found this from YouTube, my best friend. I went on 1-800-WXBrief.com, also aviationweather.gov, and you can use both of those, but 1-800-WeatherBrief will email a briefing to you in your email. Hey, we talked about route and altitude for a while, to be honest. I was ready. Don't mind the outfit change. It's another day. I probably sound sick too, but it's just from work, so don't pay attention to it. I have notes here. I actually had this paper. And I was drawing on it, and he didn't say anything about it because I was thinking, I gotta make a video on this later, and I gotta talk to my friends about this later, and I gotta help quiz them and get them ready to pass their check rides. I'm not really going to explain these concepts to you too much. I'll try to tell you the right answer, but this is stuff that you should be studying and that you should already know. Then he asked me about aero for the planes, and then he asked me about aviates pretty quickly, or maybe we just talked about half of it, but the aviates is just that acronym, and y'all already should know that. It's the very basic questions, and they're just gonna get that out of the way to make sure that you know you're legal and you know the plane is legal to fly. After he made sure that I was legal to fly and the plane was legal to fly, we went into the aircraft maintenance logs, and I showed him the annual, I showed him the VOR check, I showed him the pedostatic, and we went through the logbooks. I had to have them up the night before, I believe, so we went through that. After we confirmed that everything was legal and safe and ready to fly, amen, hallelujah, the plane actually passed its annual. Finally passed its annual. Everything was finally able and safe to fly. This is the route that he had me planned, and the preferred route for small low altitude traffic going north was this route. So it is to the Olympia VOR, and then on this Victor Airway ARPI, and this was my alternate. So I had this marked out on my map, so in paper, and then I also had it on my iPad. Then we started talking about weather, and I had my whole weather briefing from 1-800-WXBrief.com. Lifesaver, y'all. It's kind of like aviation weather services, but retweet to save life. Go on there and it will email you the briefing. So I had the briefing, an Outlook briefing emailed to me. I had an abbreviated briefing to me, and then when he asked to see the weather, I brought up the abbreviated briefing for him because it was a little bit shorter. I brought that up on my iPad in my email, and I loaded it. I made sure it was preloaded and whatever in case you don't have data or Wi-Fi. And I said, here's the weather for my fake check ride route if you would like to see it, and I gave that to him. He had my iPad in his hand and he was looking at the weather. I also presented around this time, I believe, the weight and balance. So I did 2 weight and balance sheets. The first one, we were tail heavy, and I just went through the characteristics of why that was dangerous. And I will say a very quick tip. Yo, if there's a lot to keep track of in instrument training, there's a lot to keep track of flying instruments in general, but you can bring visual aids to help you. This is VFR class things, but anyway, you can bring visual aids to help you. It is open book. That is why we bring the FAR-AIM, obviously, so you already know that. But on my weight and balance sheet, I just wrote down characteristics of why being tail heavy is dangerous, because I remember them off the top of my head, but it's really helpful because he just saw the paper and he saw everything that I had written. And so he was able to see this, and he was able to see that I was just clear, I was concise, I knew what I was talking about, I had these points laid out, I had an argument laid out basically. So he barely even asked me about that. He just said, tail heavy's not a good idea, huh? And I was like, yeah, it's not really a good idea. In IMC and actual instrument conditions, I don't feel comfortable with it. I would tell the wife to stay home, and I would not mix business with pleasure. I would just take me and my coworker for the business trip. And one thing he liked is I did mention that, oh, once we get there to Bellingham, we're not going to be able to make it back. There's going to be a cloud cover coming in, because I mentioned that I had looked at the forecast and I knew that clouds were moving in, that this front was moving in, and it was going to block our way back home, and the icing level was going to drop. So I basically told him, I showed him the foreknowledge that, hey, I'm not just planning to the place you told me about, I'm also planning and I'm thinking about coming back home, because we don't want to be stuck in Bellingham forever, right? We went into personal minimums a little bit. I didn't even pull out my personal minimum paper, I don't think, or maybe I did. I mentioned that I had it, so he didn't even ask to see it. He was just like, oh, like those are going to evolve and expand as you become more experienced. You're going to be more comfortable with things, and you have to update your personal minimum sheet. You'll also have to update it when you become an instructor. So we talked about that. After our cross country, we went into the international IACO flight plan, and then he gave me a craft clearance to copy down. So he gave me going to Painfield, 4,000 feet, expect 6,000 after 5 minutes. Frequency is 126.15, and transponder squawk code is 4425. I think some of what I was saying was already answering questions he was going to ask me anyway. So then he's like, oh, I don't need to ask her about that because she already mentioned it, right? He gave me this Painfield scenario, and I wrote it down, and I knew right away we were about to jump into lost comms. And it was something that I was so nervous about, but I'm like, I'm just ready at this point. I'm just ready at this point. So we went into it, and he said, you were on the way to the Olympio VOR, you're about reaching BTG, and you lose comms. What are you going to do? Right away I asked him, is it visual conditions? Is it VFR? Can I just go visual and can I land? And he said, no, it's pretty hard IMC, so you can't land. Went through the MEA and the AVF. I mentioned that, I brought it up to him, and we kind of talked through it, but it's not like he was giving me the answers. Like, I knew what I was going to do. Like, he wasn't giving me the answers. And he gave me 2 or 3 lost comm scenarios, but the BTG one was, I told him I would do what was expected of me. So they said to go to BTG, that is departure procedures out of Pearson, and I would do that, and I would climb to 4,000, and then I would go to 6,000 after 5 minutes, and I would do what was expected of me because he gave me that clearance and that route. We talked about what is legal, what is safe, what is expected. We talk about different scenarios, right? And one of the things was you were supposed to follow IVF MEA, but he also said, hey, you're visual, you're in the middle of the Victor Airway and you lost comms, and see an airport off to your left, are you gonna go land? And I felt like that was a little bit of a trick question, because I'm like, well, you're supposed to do what's expected, but I kind of looked at him and I said, I'm supposed to do what's expected, but this is visual conditions. What would be safe? The safer thing would be to break off, go visual, and land at this little airport that I can see literally off my left wing, right? Safety versus legality. What is practical? What is safe? What is legal? What would you actually do in this situation? Personally, I would go land. I would go land visual. He was very happy with that answer as well. He said, both answers are correct. I'm not going to knock you down for choosing to go visual and go land, because that is totally applicable. You can do that as well. Because under claiming an emergency, which lost comms is an emergency, you can also technically do whatever you want. And we talked about that too, how people will proclaim an emergency just so that they can go off and be cowboy, Mr. Man, McLady dude, and do whatever they want. But that's not legal. That's also not safe to just declare an emergency just so you can do whatever you want. During this time, he very naturally sequenced it into a no gyro approach, because we were talking about lost comms, and then we went into lost instruments, and he said, well, if you lost your vacuum power, what instruments would you lose? And I said I would lose my attitude indicator, and I would lose my DG, my heading. That's actually happened to me in real life. You've seen that video that will be linked down below. Hillary and I were on a practice flight, thankfully in VMC visual conditions, but we lost attitude indicator, so it's very applicable. Like, it does happen. And then he said, what is a no gyro approach? And I had just read about that, but a no gyro approach is you have to contact ATC, you have to request it, but they'll give you the turns. They baby your way through to the approach, basically, because you don't have your instruments to rely on. We talked about that. And then we talked about my PLT codes. Actually, my PLT codes, those are the questions you got missed on your written exam. We talked about these more near the beginning. I just forgot to mention it. And mine are all of these. You can go look those up. I'm sorry, forgive me. This video is just going to be way too long, but I naturally sequenced my PLT codes into what he was asking me, except one awkward question was he asked me about the G1000, something about the G1000 AHRs, and I knew a little bit, but I knew very little because I don't fly with the G1000. And we talked about the dangers of having autopilot on, because there's things where the pilot wasn't able to override it. Talked about the dangers of using autopilot and autoland and relying too much on equipment, right? So that wasn't really applicable to me, but we did talk about it briefly.
safely. There were two things during the oral examination that I was a little bit shaky on. The first one was drawing the hold over BTG on departure procedures at KVUO. I was struggling and not able to draw this for a while. Like, I'm like at this paper, like I was drawing this out and just staring at this. So I got it right, but I was looking at it and trying to draw for such a long time, and I'm just like, I will not fail. I will not fail the oral examination on this. Looking at it and I'm like, this is so hard right now. And you know why? I didn't have a visual aid. I should have printed out a little DG, had that to help, and I was trying to get like the compass off of my phone. So why it was mainly hard for me was because I was just trying to imagine everything in my mind, and I am more of a visual person. I'm not like that mental type thing. So it could have been a lot easier if I would have just drawn it out or prepared myself before, because I swear that the night before I was looking at departure procedures for Pearson Airport, which is where we flew out of, and I was thinking I should draw out this hold for BTG. I was thinking, Abby, you should draw out the hold for BTG because it's a little bit weird and it's only in text, right? It's not visually, so you should just draw it out, but I didn't. I believe also what would have helped me is on the Scappoose approach that uses BTG as an IAF on the VOR, I believe, it shows the hold on that approach. So if I would have known that, or if I would have remembered because I just forgot, I would have known, and I could have, but I struggled and drew this out myself, and I'm proud of it. She's cute. I'm really proud of myself. But that was such a shaky moment where my life was flashing before my eyes. And then the second one, he asked, what is the self-correcting mechanism on the attitude indicator? And I was like, rigidity in space and precession. It's on the gimbal. It's mounted in the gimbal. And I was going through that, and he was just like, no, that's not it. So I repeated it, but in different words, right? He was like, no, I'm not looking for rigidity in space. And I'm like, okay. That's all I got. That's my whole but I didn't get it. It is pendulous veins. So the pendulous veins is what keeps the attitude indicator self-correcting. But what really saved me was he wasn't too happy about it, right? But I'm like, let me consult a p-hack. I had it on my iPad, and I read through, and I'm reading through, and I don't see anything about what the self-correcting mechanism is on the attitude indicator. And I told him I don't see it, and I kind of gave it to him because he asked to see my iPad. Jesus heard my prayer that morning, because he looks at me and he's like, oh, sorry, I guess this is more of a commercial question to ask you. I see that it's not in the p-hack. I thought it was in the p-hack. They must have updated it or something. That's what he said to me. That's what he said to me. And I was like, whoo! I did not crack open that p-hack, Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. So remember, it is open book. It is open book. Please don't forget that we talked about what concerns you when temperature and dew point are close. That is when visible moisture is going to show up. So condensation, that's going to be fog, that's going to be rain, it's going to be bad conditions. So we talked about that. That was easy. We talked about recovery from a spiraling dive. I think that was the only unusual attitudes question he asked me. We talked about what would happen to the airspeed indicator if the static port was blocked. We talked about lost comms, stay VFR, I already mentioned that. We talked about WAS and RAIM, and I do have to check RAIM on this plane. I was prepared to do that. I was prepared to know how to do that. We talked about GPS modes. Actually, I lied. This was one thing I got a little bit wrong, how it swaps to approach mode 2 miles from the final approach fix. I knew that, but I forgot it, but I knew where to find it. So I was able to find that in my manual. I didn't know the exact modes, like the 1.0, 0.5. I didn't know exactly because I did forget a little bit, but I was able to know where to find them, and more importantly, I was able to know that it was actually a thing. Like, if you would have asked me about GPS modes and I would have said, I have no idea what you're talking about, that would be a little bit concerning, because basically when it's swapping GPS modes, it means that the sensitivity changes. It gets more and more sensitive the closer you are to the approach course. It's important to know, because it means it gets more sensitive the closer you get to the approach course and the closer you get to the airport. I obviously knew about it. I knew where to find it. I just didn't know the exact values. One of the last things we talked about was RVR values, and I had that tabbed in my FARM, and I was able to bring that up, but I also remembered I don't feel like he focused on weather too much, although we did talk about weather. We talked about everything. I feel like he focused a little bit more on instruments and procedures. The very last thing that we ended with was looking over to approach plates. So at Hillsborough, which is one that we were going to do for 1-3 right, and I messed up a little bit because I said VOR to direct DAFI, and he said you could just do GPS DAFI, and then he pulled out this approach plate, which is a standard T, and he asked me, when are you able to descend? A very popular question for him was, when can you descend? That was basically, he pointed everywhere on the plate and asked me a question on pretty much everything on the plate. He would just point and ask, so when are you established? When can you descend? When can you start the approach? When can you descend to the airport from here? What about from here? What about if you were entering from here? For that, read chapter 5, and this is what he told me to study a little bit more in depth. He did give me some things to study, so he said to study chapter 5 more on TAA procedures, but overall he did test me on pretty much everything. And then after that,
That was the final approach plate he was gonna quiz me about. He took it away and he said, congrats, you are now an instrument rated pilot. Well, 50% instrument rated because we can't fly today. So we didn't fly that day. Icing level was at around 3,000, 4,000, I think. So right where we would have had to be for the approaches. And it was like one of the worst days ever to fly. So I definitely said, we're not flying. And he said, good decision. Thank you so much for watching. I will have the practical portion of the exam up as soon as I possibly can. Bear with me. I have been working a lot. And I'm studying for my commercial now, but it will be up as soon as I can. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. In the meantime, take care and bye. The audacity of you to look that beautiful after. Why she's gotta be so pretty after we are done flying? And Mohammed and I came back and landed. An elderly white man just saw me filming in his truck. He just passed me by in his truck.
Now, for me, my instrument journey, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it because it is a new year. I have hope in my soul. Like let's leave that in the back. Let's not talk about her. It's pretty quick. It's not like private, because private they do really like shake you around and they're like, recover from that, buddy boy. But sorry, that was aggressive. But all my 2 brain cells connected at the same amount of time.
Is it April? Because this, I feel like a fool and it feels like a joke. Like I cannot believe I got to this point, especially just because of everything that instrument was.
Look at us ahead of the curve. Look at us ahead of the game. Just out here sounding like a sick dog. But anyway.